A snowy New Jersey, but at this time of year, it is not only the winter storms that occupy the Midwest, but chatter out there in the atmosphere like snowflakes, especially in the heartland in Iowa. Mitt Romney out of the Republican race, but the others who perhaps remain are in the news. We're rejoined by Miranda Kahn. You've got word of some numbers out of Iowa.
Yeah, let's go ahead and look at it. This is the Iowa poll just recently released, and take a look. It shows Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker is in the lead, closely followed by Senator Rand Paul.
You see him there at 16 and 15%, then Mike Huckabee at 13, Ben Carson with 10, and the supposed front runner, Jeb Bush, down at 9%.
Changes the whole dynamic, doesn't it?
It's interesting.
With
We'll see. Well, speaking of that, a gentleman well-versed in Republican politics. He's been even known to give me a little advice back in the days when I was doing So Engaged. Our friend Craig Shirley, president of Shirley and Bannister's Public Affairs and the author of the book Reagan's Revolution, the untold story of the campaign that started it all. Craig, it is so good to have you. Let's get into this as you Skype in from Northern Virginia. Life after Mitt. What do you make of it?
Well, I think that, JD, first of all, good morning. The Republican Party is going through a metamorphosis as we speak right now. It was a Reagan-dominated party up until 1989, and then again in 1994, as you well know, with the rise of Newt Gingrich and what many saw as a mandate on a return of Reaganism principles to the Republican Party. After 8 years of Bush, what we're witnessing now is that an internal debate inside the Republican Party over what does it stand for? Does it stand for Reagan-esque type of populist reform, conservative principles, or does it stand for the big government republicanism as espoused by George W. Bush and now by Jeb Bush? I think that Jeb is probably a little surprised this morning. My guess is that because he's learning very quickly that the nomination is not going to be handed to him on a silver platter.
So were you surprised at all by those numbers?
I was.
Yeah?
Yeah, Miranda. The four outsiders are leading, and actually, if you total their numbers, it's well over 50%. I think that's indicative of what we're discussing this morning, is that the party is, in many ways, returning to its Reagan roots.
Well, as we take a look at that poll, the Des Moines Register Bloomberg Politics poll, you're right. Scott Walker, who's a next-door neighbor to Iowa, if my geographical skills are still there, in the lead. But again, it has been noted that Scott Walker has a view on the borders, not unlike that of his fellow Wisconsinite Paul Ryan. When the grassroots hear about that, will the bloom be off the Walker rose?
Well, that's an excellent point, and I think that he's going to have to address that very quickly. And as a matter of fact, now that the sunlight is on him, that he's emerged, because he apparently did so well at the Freedom Forum last week, and also I know Rush Limbaugh has been talking him up the last several days on his show, is with the sunlight on him, he's got to make the most of this opportunity. He needs to give a series of important policy speeches, not about himself, not run a personal campaign. Mitt Romney tried that in 2012 and failed. Is that what he needs to talk about is the American people. He needs to remember the American presidency is not about the president. The American presidency is about the American people. And too many candidates listen to their consultants and have run these personality campaigns. He needs to reject that. He needs to talk about the future, young Americans, articulate a hopeful conservative vision for the future that is not just wrapped up in being anti-Obama, but is actually pro-conservative.
Greg, Senator John McCain over the weekend endorsed Senator Lindsey Graham. Are we going to see more and more people become potential GOP candidates like Walker?
Oh, I think so. This is the most wide open the nomination process has been since 1940, when Wendell Willkie came out of nowhere and defeated the favorite Senator Robert Taft of Ohio. There is no clear front runner. Is the insiders? If you poll the insiders and the money people, And the consultants, they would say, well, Jeb Bush is the front runner. But the people of Iowa obviously have a different opinion than the insiders and the elites inside the Republican Party. So, and there's two things that are at play right now. Is that since 1948 is that the party that was in power for two consecutive terms, was turned out of power 8 years later. The only exception being, of course, Reagan in 1988, because many people saw the election of George W. Bush as really a third Reagan term, and of course Reagan in 1980 by defeating Carter for a
We're going to have to leave it right there, Craig Shirley. We thank you for a look ahead and a thoughtful look back, and America's Forum continues after this update. Alongside Miranda Kahn, J.D. Hayworth welcoming you back to America's Forum. Let's continue the conversation with Craig Shirley, the president of Shirley and Bannister Public Affairs and the author of the book Reagan's Revolution, The Untold Story of the Campaign That Started It All. Craig, Miranda asked you a question at the conclusion of the last segment about John McCain endorsing Lindsey Graham for president. Personal affection aside, is this an example of senatorial vanity? Or does Lindsey have a chance to shake things up in that early primary state of South Carolina?
Oh, I think that it's probably more about friendship and McCain wanting to remain a presence in the nominating process as much as anything. I don't see, of course, I mean, who knows? I don't have a crystal ball or the newspapers of tomorrow, but I frankly don't see Lindsey Graham being a serious factor. Maybe a couple of percentage points representing the neocon position, which would probably come out of the establishment, backside of Jeb Bush or Chris Christie or Marco Rubio. But I don't see this as being really a factor. He might tip the contest. It's probably good news for the Reaganite conservative wing of the party that he's in, because he would take a point or two away from the Bush establishment candidates.
Craig, according to a Quinnipiac University poll, the big winner from Romney leaving was Jeb Bush. But we showed you an earlier poll that said he didn't actually do as well as people were expecting from the announcement.
No, go ahead.
No,
that is an interesting dynamic. I mean, I think we all assumed, including me, is that they were in effect, playing out of the same golf bag, and both Romney and Bush. And as it turns out, is that the interesting dynamic of politics is that when people are forced to make a choice, they don't automatically, when one choice is removed, they don't automatically go for this option B. They might go for, as we see now, is they go for option C or D. So that the people who are really for Romney were really for Romney, but that doesn't mean Bush was necessarily the second choice. And we've seen this before in American politics. And
of course, we should make a distinction. The Quinnipiac poll, I'm not sure of its sample group, but the Iowa poll we were sourcing earlier came from Des Moines Register and I believe Bloomberg Politics, dealing specifically with Iowa. Speaking of that poll, Marco Rubio and Rick Perry, two guys prominently mentioned, did not fare well in that Des Moines poll, with only 4% and then 3% of Iowa voters saying they would be their first choice for president. It's early yet. Can those guys resuscitate their campaigns in Iowa?
Yes, I think so. Especially, I would think especially Rick Perry, because he has a story to tell. Successful term as governor of Texas, and he is an engaging personality. He's going to have to, like the others, like Walker, address his position on and immigration, as will Rubio. I mean, this is going to be a major bone of contention in the nomination process, is that where people stand on immigration, quote unquote, reform. It's a giant fissure right now inside the Republican Party, and I don't think it can be underestimated.
So, Craig, I'm going to quote a little Shakespeare here. What's in a name? That which we call a name by any other. There you go.
Hey,
that's
good.
You like that? That was pretty good, right? Yes. So Bush, does his name work for him or against him?
I would say at this point, he might be faring better if his last name was Smith or Jones or Hayworth or something else right now. Is that
not Con? Just kidding.
He is dragging the failed Bush legacy inside the Republican Party. Both his father, I'm talking as an historian now, not how I view them personally, but I think that most people inside the Republican Party and most people in America today view the first Bush favorably, but his presidency by most accounts was considered to be a failure. And the same thing with the second, with Bush, with W, that his 2 terms were seen as not as successful 2 terms in office. Certainly historians have ranked them both low as presidents. And so he's dragging that anchor. And although it helps him with the insiders and with the money people, that only carries so much weight in Republican primary politics, is that, we've seen wealthy candidates before, John Connolly and Phil Gramm and others, go nowhere because basically they came across as the dog food the dogs don't like.
Fair enough. Craig Shirley, we do appreciate your perspective. One note, if Jeb were going to change his last name to Hayworth, he'd have to change that whole thing about the border and calling illegal immigration an act of love.
That's true. It comes with the name.
Yeah. Well, anyway, be that as it may, our thanks to Craig Shirley. More politics and more America's Forum when we continue here from Newsmax TV. Stay with us.